Well, it's that time of year where things get a little darker and spookier. Happy Halloween. Let's dive in to one of Shakespeare's spookiest plays, Macbeth. So once upon a time in the land of Scotland, during a dark and stormy night, 3 witches schemed to confront a man named Macbeth after a battle, then, they disappear. We then go to King Duncan of Scotland and a camp near his castle with his sons Malcolm and Donalbain, the noble Lennox, and a military captain. He asks the captain, who was wounded helping Malcolm escape capture, about the battle with the invading Irish. The captain tells how the generals Banquo and Macbeth are literally killing it at this war, including Macbeth slaying the terrible Macdonald. The captain's carried off, then Duncan is told by the Thane Ross that the Thane of Cawdor was defeated and the Norwegian army has stopped. Duncan commands execution to the Thane of Cawdor, and then the hero Macbeth will have the Cawdor's tile. So Ross, along with the Thane Angus, deliver the news. Elsewhere, the 3 witches meet up on the heath near the battlefield just as they planned. 2 of them chat about their evil doings, and then the 3rd spots Macbeth approaching. Finally, we meet Macbeth along with his boy Banquo on their way to the king's court. They see the witches and recoil at their sight. Banquo inquires whether or not they are mortal because they don't seem, quote, inhabitants of the earth. Remember that quote. He also finds it weird that they have beards like men. The witches tell of Macbeth's original title of the Thane of Glamis, but also of Cawdor. This confuses Macbeth, for he doesn't know about Duncan's decree yet. The witches also say that Macbeth will be king, which of course gets him excited, so he asks for more info. The witches, however, have moved the riddles onto Banquo, saying he'll be, quote, lesser than Macbeth and greater. Remember that quote. Because he will never be king, but his family line will be on the throne. Macbeth wants them to explain why they called him the Thane of Cawdor, but then they vanish. Macbeth and Banquo then agree that the little episode was legit weird. Macbeth's all like, Banquo, dude, your kids are gonna be kings, what? Then Banquo's like, yeah, but you're gonna be king, what? Then they're cut off by the arrival of Ross and Angus, coming to take them to the king. Ross tells Macbeth about the Cawdor situation. Macbeth is amazed by the witch's prediction, and then wonders if the rest of what they said will come true. Banquo suggests that they could have been telling half-truths in order to leave them to harm, but Macbeth ignores him and talks to himself about becoming king. He wonders if kingship will be given to him or if he'll have to do some dark stuff to get it. As they leave, he whispers to Banquo that they need to talk about their new revelations later. At the palace, Duncan gets news that Malcolm executed the old Thane of Cawdor, and then Macbeth and the others enter. Duncan thanks Macbeth and Banquo greatly for their heroism, and they declare their loyalty in return. Duncan then speaks on how he is placing Malcolm as heir to the throne. Macbeth acts happy to the news, but to himself he affirms that Malcolm is now between him and the throne. Plans are then made for Duncan to eat at Macbeth's castle, called Inverness, that night, and then Macbeth goes to tell his wife who's coming to dinner. At Inverness, Lady Macbeth has gotten a letter from her husband catching her up on Cawdor and the witches. She knows that Macbeth is strong-minded, but also knows that he's been taught too much kindness to take the necessary actions to be king. So she determines that she's got to motivate him towards bloody actions to make it happen. Macbeth then enters and they talk about the king coming to dinner. Lady M says that Duncan won't see tomorrow and tells Macbeth to leave the plan to her. Next, Duncan, accompanied by some others, including the Thane of Fife, Macduff, arrive at Macbeth's castle. Lady M greets him and he praises the comfort the castle gives off and her hospitality, and she's like, that's just what I do for my king. Duncan then asks to be taken to Macbeth. While dinner is being prepared in the other room, Macbeth contemplates about killing Duncan. He concludes that there's no other reason to kill Duncan rather than for himself to become king, and that is not a really great reason. Lady M enters and Macbeth tells her that he no longer wants to kill Duncan, angering his wife. She calls him a coward, then Macbeth is all like, well, what if we fail? She says, quote, screw your courage to the sticking place. Remember that quote. Because as long as we are bold, we will succeed, dude. Her plan includes getting Duncan drunk so he'll sleep, then they'll go in for the kill. Also, they'll blame it on the servants. Macbeth, impressed by her airtight plan, is now convinced and then goes to kill Duncan, ending Act 1. Act 2 opens with Banquo and his son Fleance in Macbeth's castle at midnight. Banquo says that when he sleeps, it brings him cursed thoughts. Then Macbeth, on his way to kill the king, enters, surprising Banquo because he's up so late. He tells Macbeth that the witches were speaking some truth, but Macbeth, acting nonchalant, says that he hasn't thought of the witches since they saw them and that they'll talk about the witches later. Banquo and Fleance leave, and here Macbeth has the "Is this a dagger I see before me" speech, where he sees a vision of a dagger with the handle pointing towards him and the blade towards Duncan. When he tries to grab it, he fails, so he ponders if it's a real dagger or if it's all in his head. After seeing blood on the blade, he promptly says that it's a hallucination from his unease. Macbeth feels a great presence of horror, but concludes that he must do the bloody deed. A bell is heard, which is Lady M's signal to say that the servants are asleep, so Macbeth heads to Duncan's room. As he leaves, his wife enters, remarking to herself about her great poise and that Macbeth is probably killing Duncan as she speaks. But then Macbeth is heard crying out, so she fears that the servants awoke. She's befuddled on how he could fail because she made such airtight plan. She also says that she'd kill the king herself if he didn't look so much like her dad. Issues, you know. But then Macbeth re-enters with bloodstained hands saying, he did! Okay! He's shaken, of course, and tells that he heard the servants wake up after one of them in their sleep shouted murder. Then they prayed and went back to sleep. When they said amen, he tried to say it too, but he couldn't. I wonder why. He also thought he heard them say that they know that he's murdering. At first, his wife tries to calm him, but then she gets angry when he sees he forgot to put the daggers with the servants to frame them. Macbeth refuses to go back, so Lady M goes to do this and calls him a coward again. After she leaves, Macbeth hears knocking and panics, saying, quote, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? Remember that quote. Lady M re-enters and the knocking is heard again, and she leads her husband to a chamber to wash off the blood. A porter then goes to answer the door, joking on how he's like the porter of the gates of hell. It's a little weird because he doesn't know about the murder, and moving on. Macbeth and Lennox enter, and Macbeth complains about how the porter took so long, and then the porter jokes about how it was the night's alcohol that made him do that. Macbeth enters, and Macbeth asks if the king is still asleep, because he wanted to see Macbeth very early. Macbeth says that the king is still asleep, and that he'll take them to them. As Macbeth enters Duncan's room, Lennox speaks on how the night's storms was nothing like they had ever seen before. Macbeth runs back, shouting that the king has been murdered! As Macbeth and Lennox go to take a look, Lady M comes in and cries how such a terrible thing could be done in her home. Banquo, Ross, Malcolm, and Donalbain eventually all show up and are filled in on the murder. The servants are accused, and Macbeth says in a rage he killed them. Macbeth is confused by these words, and Macbeth says it was because he was just so mad at the king's death. Lady M then faints, and Macbeth and Lennox call for attendance. Then Malcolm and Donalbain say quietly to each other that they are not safe. Lady M's taken away, while Macbeth and Banquo call together the lords to discuss the king's death. Then Malcolm and Donalbain say they have to go, Malcolm to England and Donalbain to Ireland. Next, Ross and an old man walk outside the castle. They discuss the odd things that have been happening lately, including while it is daytime, it's dark out. Macbeth then finds them and tells how Macbeth has been made king and that he's off to Scone to be crowned. Macbeth then adds that the servants were certainly the murderers and that they were probably hired to do so. So now suspicion lands on the two sons of the former king since they fled so quickly. Macbeth then goes to leave for his home in Fife, and Ross leaves to go to Scone to see the crowning, and finally Act 2 ends. Look at that. Act 3 opens at the royal palace where Banquo contemplates about Macbeth and the prophecies of the witches. He wonders, since Macbeth becoming king came true, will the second prophecy, the one of his children, come true? Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, now king and queen, enter along with the court. The two invite Banquo to a feast and he accepts. Macbeth then says that they must talk about the sons who fled Scotland, for they might be plotting against him. Banquo leaves and Macbeth dismisses the court. He then sends a servant to fetch some men who came to see him. Alone now, Macbeth ponders about Banquo and how he's the only man he now fears because he too heard the witches' predictions and how Macbeth will have no heirs. He notes that the murder he committed, which haunts his conscience, may give way to Banquo's sons to overthrow him. The servant then comes back with the men. Macbeth refreshes the men who he hired as murderers, that he told them that Banquo wronged him and that he asks if any of them are angry enough to take revenge on him. They say they are, and then Macbeth reminds them that Fleance must be killed as well and to wait in the castle for his command. Elsewhere, Lady Macbeth is distressed and sends for her husband. When he enters, he says he too is distressed, saying, quote, "Full of scorpions is my mind." Remember that quote. He remarks that what they have started is not done. He tells what he's done for Banquo and Fleance and says that Lady M must be super nice to Banquo at the feast so he won't suspect a thing. In the dusk, the two murderers are joined by a third, and Banquo and Felice show up. They light a torch and the murderers attack. As Banquo is being killed, he tells his son to run and seek vengeance. One of the murderers puts out the torch so Fleance escapes in the darkness. Oops. The murderers then exit with the corpse to tell Macbeth about their slip-up. At the feast, Macbeth goes to talk to one of the murderers who catches him up on what happened. Macbeth gets angry about Fleance escaping because it makes his throne not secure. When Macbeth returns to the feast table, he sees that Banquo's ghost is sitting in his chair and he starts freaking out. He confuses everyone there, so Lady Macbeth makes some excuses telling everyone not to worry about it. She tells Macbeth to snap out of it, and the ghost leaves. Macbeth recollects himself and tells the guest not to worry. He starts a toast, but then the ghost comes back and Macbeth freaks out again. Lady M makes some more excuses and then sends the guests out. Macbeth tells her that Macduff might be planning treason and that he'll go back to the witches tomorrow to get more info on everything and then goes to bed. Meanwhile, the witches meet with Hecate, the witch goddess, who scolds them for their business with Macbeth. She says that she is now in charge of the whole endeavor and that when Macbeth comes tomorrow, they will call forth spirits to give Macbeth false confidence. That night, Lennox talks to a lord about all that's happened lately, such as Fleance being blamed for Banquo's death. They both actually suspect Macbeth for that death and Duncan's. The lord says that Macduff has gone to England to help Malcolm request of King Edward for military assistance. Also, that news of this requesting has made Macbeth prepare for war and Act 3 ends. Yeesh. This play is really violent. Maybe we should take a break before we get desensitized to it. That night, outside the party castle, Hamlet, his boy Horatio, and a guard from the other night, Marcellus, are waiting in the cold for the ghost, like you do. And you know what? It shows up. Ooh!